Hey everybody, welcome to Goshen Prepping. I'm always looking at articles, trying to find information that's going to be helpful, not even just for you, but for me too. And when it comes to nuclear and food, of course, we want to be able to stay healthy and survive and not eat radioactive food. Who wants that stuff? So I came across this article. Let's glean through it and find some really good information about what you can eat after a nuclear event. From the Business Insider, which is interesting how a business thing always has stuff like this. Where to find food and water that's safe to eat in the event of a nuclear apocalypse. Whether it's from a nuclear war between nations, nuclear power plant meltdown, or simply just radiation raining from the skies. Well, it's more real now than it has been in generations past. And in a nuclear apocalyptic-like situation, securing food and water should be one of your first priorities for sure. And one of the big things about a nuclear event, there is a concern, a very serious one by the way, that food and water could be contaminated by radioactive materials released into the environment from, well, the plant or from a nuclear detonation, etc. Nuclear fallout. Bad news. So let's go through some different things that this article says we should do. Number one, start with whatever's in your fridge. Since the fridge is sealed and most food is already in packages, it is safe to consume. For anything that needs to be cooked, you'll need to try to minimize contamination. To do that, wipe down the counter and all your cooking supplies with a damp cloth, then store the cloth in a sealed container. Well, maybe. This is making the assumption that some nuclear material got into your house. And when it comes, well, it depends on the nuclear material, by the way. If we're talking about a nuclear power plant, for sure. If there's a fire raging and that ash and soot is taking that material from the plant and is blowing it through your windows, which can happen, yes, definitely want to make sure everything's wiped down and cleaned off. You do not want to ingest radioactive material, period. That's the worst. If we're talking about a nuclear detonation and we're talking about fallout, miles downwind, that's going to be like sand and glass. It's not going to get onto your countertops inside your house unless you have like gale force winds. Have you ever had sand blow through like cracks in your windows? That's because of the high winds. That's the only time at that point you're going to have nuclear material coming into your house, by the way, is if it's gale force winds, because the material coming down from nuclear fallout is much too heavy to simply just blow around. It's not dust like people think it is. Next, eat what's in your freezer and pantry. Foods in your freezer or pantry should also be safe, and anything that's been stored behind a door and this packaging is fair game. No, it will be safe. Understand that the freezer, practically speaking, is sealed. In your pantry, even if it's a cardboard box full of graham crackers, you're not going to have the radioactive material getting inside that box. Canned food and everything, even if you have fallout, which again is the worst of the worst, sitting on a can of corned beef hash, just rinse off the can. It'll be good to go. Because as long as that radioactive material, I don't care if it's dust from a fire from a nuclear plant or if it's fallout like sand or glass coming on it, if you're able to keep it off the food, you're good to go. Now, if as soon as it touches your food, that food is not safe for you to eat. Canned fruits and veggies will last about 1 to 3 years in your pantry and are often good sources of fiber, vitamins, and minerals. No, you are wrong, Business Insider. When it comes to canned food, sure, it does have the fiber, vitamins, and minerals. That's not what I'm talking about, but it says last 1 to 3 years. Absolutely not. Canned food lasts indefinitely. It's sterile contents in the can as long as the can's not compromised. Doesn't have any breaks in the seals. It hasn't been exposed to extreme heat or extreme cold. Doesn't have any big, sharp dents in it, especially along the seals. It'll be fine as long as that can's integrity is maintained. Now, vegetables, one thing, yeah, you can eat vegetables 30 years later. Can you eat canned fruit 30 years later? Well, the thing is with fruit or anything acidic, like tomato sauce, for example, that is highly acidic, it will kind of like mess with the lining of the can and it makes it taste metallically awful. But you can still eat it. 30 years later, you can still eat it just fine. It just is not the most appetizing thing in the world. But you know what? It's better to have nasty tasting tomato sauce than no tomato sauce when the world's been annihilated by a nuclear attack. Okay, so this is a very common misconception. Even our government very clearly says, the USDA says that cans, as long as they're intact, stay that way and remain fresh indefinitely. They don't expire, no matter what the expiration or best by date says. However, you'll want to throw away fruit on your counter or any food that might have been exposed to radiation in the air. And that is true if we're talking about like a nuclear power plant is burning and that ash and soot is getting in there. But if you're talking about you have a banana or an orange or even an orange that's been peeled sitting on your counter and fallout rains down on your house, as long as that fallout's not getting in, in other words, you don't have an open window and things are blowing in, it is perfectly fine. Now, I always recommend having a Geiger counter. And I just did a video, which I'll link at the end of this, by the way, talking about what to look for a Geiger counter. But I love my GQ Geiger counter. And it's easy enough, if that orange sitting on your counter is radioactive, Well, how do you know? This will tell you. It'll completely just simply scan it over it and will tell you if it's radioactive or not. So simple and such a cheap, not cheap, but obviously inexpensive investment to make sure that you can eat following a nuclear attack. Make sure you pick up one of these. I'll link it below. Use bottled water to stay hydrated. After nuclear event, all local water, including well water, is considered contaminated. Yes and no. Okay, just kind of hear me out. What they're trying to do is play an err on the side of caution, and I'm with you. That's always a good move and technique. But think about it this way. Since fallout, and again, a nuclear plant burning, that's a different situation because that ash and stuff on there may actually cause problems. But if we're talking about nuclear detonation, understand that glass and sand, as far as the fallout, again, it's not dust. When it hits a reservoir, which is the most common source for your local tap water, all that fallout will simply fall to the bottom of those ponds. Even the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and all its other big nuclear sites or websites and everything will tell you that water for towns and municipalities should be fine because they don't drain it from the bottom anyway. They try to keep it from the top, and it should be good. Now, your well, same thing. The biggest thing you have to worry about with nuclear or radioactive water is if you're actually close to a radioactive source or even fallout near it, yeah, you do have to worry about what's called alpha radiation, which is the least deadly of the radiations, by the way. But nevertheless, if you're drinking water that's contaminated by this, it's called heavy water, and you drink a lot of it, it's actually releasing this alpha radiation inside your body, and it will damage your tissue. It will. I'll make that so clear. And even this Geiger counter, by the way, that I showed you, will not test for alpha radiation. So your best bet is to listen to the radio or listen to your municipality to say if it's safe or not as far as water goes. For me in my house, by the way, just FYI, you'll have to look at your own situation. We're so far out in the middle of nowhere, and the odds of water that's 200 feet underground in my well being contaminated is slim and none. I'm going to still keep drinking it. I can't say the same thing for you because how deep is your well? Where is it coming from? How close were you to the detonation, et cetera? There's so many different variables that come into play on this. So if you don't know, the article saying err on the side of caution and listen to your government to let you know if that's the case. But if your well, like our well, we don't have an open well. If you have an open well and fallout's coming in, yeah, forget that. But if you have like a deep well with a casing and it's sealed like ours, fallout's not going to get in there. You do have to worry about, very slightly, mind you, some alpha contamination with heavy water coming through the aquifers underneath the ground. That is a possibility, a very real possibility. So again, if you don't know any better, for me, I'm going to keep drinking the water. If you don't know, then listen to the government and this news article. But you can use your tap water to wash foods, just, don't drink it. Yeah, so they're saying that there's a possibility that your water is contaminated, not with some major contamination that'll hurt you per se, only if you ingest it. And it takes a lot of ingesting it, by the way. So they're saying, it's okay to go ahead and wash up your fruit. The amount of heavy water contamination you're going to have on your orange after you wash it off, et cetera, is going to be practically negligible is what they're saying here. So I agree with that statement. Skip your garden fresh veggies or eggs. For fruits and veggies that literally came in contact with fallout, that's really bad news. You do not want to ingest that because they will be radioactive. They found that chicken eggs from radiation will actually be detectable for at least 5 months. So no eggs, fresh eggs anyway, for 5 months. Try to take steps to protect your crops for later, like shut your vents if you have a greenhouse. If you have livestock, move them indoors, because anything that touches this fallout, like veggies and stuff, will absorb the radioactive material. And if you eat it bad, such as like your cow, your pet cow you have in the backyard, if it eats some of those veggies or grass that's been contaminated with fallout, your cow is now contaminated. Your cow will glow in the dark. Just kidding, it won't. But it will be contaminated. Even the milk will be contaminated. And that's bad news for you and your family and your babies if you're feeding them cow's milk and you can't eat that cow either. So if you know what's happening, get your cow indoors, shut the vents to your greenhouse if you can. And even if you can put a tarp over your veggies, that might work to be able to keep the fallout off your plants. Stick to healthy packaged foods. Brown rice, canned veggies are typically safe. Canned fish, tuna, salmon, sardines, high quality meat like chicken, nuts, nut butter, rice, protein bars, etc. are all good. In other words, we're preppers. This is stuff we're preparing for. All that's going to be good to go. Again, as long as the radiation, the fallout hasn't touched that food, you're good to go. Be savvy about the used by dates. Look, they even say here that these dates refer to the quality and freshness and the flavor of the food, but don't necessarily refer to safety. The only exception may be baby formula. That is true. And it's funny, they're almost contradicting what they said before. Here's the statement. If cans are dented, rusted, or swollen, throw them out. These may have signs of botulism or other foodborne illnesses. So true. Do not go hunting. Radiation can be and will be particularly high in some game animals due to their diet. For example, deer who live on plants that have been exposed to radiation. And that's true, but Geiger counter. It'll tell if you're in a situation where the food is so scarce now because this is a major nuclear attack, you may not have a choice. So having your Geiger counter will tell you if you have radioactive deer in your backyard. But this one is so important, so true. Avoid mushrooms. Mushrooms are still dangerous to eat even when other plants are actually safe. Yes, so true. Mushrooms are what are called saprophobes. They feed off of dead decaying matter. And dead decaying matter may be like radioactive plants that have fallen because, honestly, radiation doesn't hurt plants very much. But if you do have something that fell, those mushrooms soak up a lot of the materials, including radioactive material, to make the mushroom cap. And that, even though they're tasty, portobello's delicious stuff, are not what you want to eat because they have the highest amount of radiation compared to other like plants per se. And we have special instructions for feeding those babies. Formula is always a good thing, or preparing formula using bottled water. But if you're breastfeeding, it's typically safe unless you have ingested radioactive material. And this is where the miscommunication comes in, by the way. However, if you were exposed to radiation, it's best to feed previously expressed milk or formula until you've seen a doctor. No. That's not how this works. There's two things when it comes to radioactive. You have radioactive material, it releases radiation. So if you've been exposed to radiation, radiation's gone through you, it does not make you radioactive and your milk will be just fine. But if you've ingested radioactive material, that's so bad because radioactive material is inside of you now and releases radiation. That's why you have some serious problems. And that radioactive material can be pushed down into the breast milk. And now you're putting radioactive material into the baby's milk. Bad news, especially with babies, because the way their genetics work and as far as their cells dividing so quickly, they have a much higher incidence of cancer in these situations. So bad news. But if you've been exposed to radiation, that's not what they're trying to talk about here. They don't understand this. If you have somehow ingested radioactive material, that's the difference. And finally, lucky number 13, prepare for long-term changes. That is so true. And that's why as preppers, as a prepping channel, me being your host, trying to help you understand, you need to prepare for all contingencies for long term. Have a lot of food in there. It literally may take years. I mean, think about this. Even if your area got some radiation and fallout and you're like, you know what, I could just move somewhere else. We're talking about in a major event. We're talking about a nuclear war. If you survive such a thing, we're talking about years and years of cataclysmic changes. And why do we prep? To survive. That's the whole point. We are survivors. We want to prep and have the food and everything so we can get past through and get through all these things, because obviously that's inherently dangerous, ingesting radioactive material. So we want to be on the safe side in all ways. And so therefore, long term, don't think you're going to get out of this anytime soon. That's why I always talk about when it comes to preparedness, we should really focus on preparing, stockpiling stuff. Oh yeah, it's good. But then also we should be looking at long-term self-sufficiency. So that way we don't have to depend on the government and everybody else to be able to make it through these situations. Wow. So hopefully this day never comes, obviously. And if it is an event, hopefully it's just a very small local event and hopefully you're not in there. But this list, Business Insider, yeah, pretty good job. Thanks for putting this news article out to keep us nice and refreshed. Anyways, check out this video here so we can see how the Geiger counter works.